Hi, and welcome to another NOAA Connections for Parents. This call is for parents and grandparents and caregivers of children with albinism who are in the school ages. And we're going to talk today a little bit about some of the programs and services that are available for students, for the education of students with albinism in those age groups, and also some other resources that are available either more locally in your area and also through the NOAA website. I'm Kathi Garza, and I am a teacher of students with visual impairments. I work at Texas School for the Blind as a statewide consultant in the outreach department. So I serve families with children who are in the early childhood age group and who are blind or visually impaired. And so we support their families and instructional teams in developing appropriate programming. And I'm here with Jill, who I adore.
Oh, thank you, Kathi. Goes both ways. Thank you. Hi, I'm Jill Gorman. I am a parent volunteer with NOAA, and our son is 16 years old and has albinism. We live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and as a family, we've been volunteering with NOAA for many years, since our son was a toddler, and we've found NOAA to be an extremely helpful resource to us. And the community has been so welcoming and supportive of us as a family. And I'm looking forward to this discussion. And Kathi, did you want to?
Yeah, so we are, well, so Jill, I think we typically at the beginning of these calls, we talk a little bit about, we have a little bit of a disclaimer that we like to share. Do you have that?
Yeah, so, Kathi and I are here as volunteers, and we're here to share with you our experiences and be supportive to you as myself as a parent and Kathi as a TVI. But we are not attorneys, but we are here as a resource to support you. So if you ever have questions after this call, after this connections, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll help you in any way we can, sharing resources that we know of based on our experiences, and also sharing with you the resources that NOAA has.
Yeah, and Jill's in California and I'm in Texas, and we know that although the laws are made to protect people, individuals and children with disabilities, we don't know the laws in the intricacies of them in every state. We don't know all of the intricacies of the programs that we're going to be talking about. And so we do our best and we learn from other people, but even within the state of Texas, and I'm sure within the state of California, different areas have different services, different abilities to provide services and different quality of services. And so while everybody has the best of intentions, not every city or town or district can provides the same types of resources. I think they all do their best to provide what's appropriate and and at no cost to families, because that's what IDEA says they have to do, but it doesn't always mean it's going to be free and best, and so we're here to support if we can, but there may be things that we don't know the answers to. We'll try to help you figure it out. So
and I think that's one fantastic aspect about being part of the NOAA community, especially when we gather together, because we're in California, as Kathi shared, and when we come together as a NOAA community, we have the opportunity to meet other parents in our state and outside of our state, where we can share ideas. And when we meet families within our state, we even have the opportunity to share resources that are within our own state. So, again, finding those resources is key, and that's what NOAA is here to do, is to support you as a family.
So yes, and even us adults with albinism who are out of the school system,
that's very true.
So when we originally did this is a re-record, and when we originally did this call, we had the audience in the call was quite a majority of the people that we had in the call had children who were in the early childhood range. So very young infants to age 3, like going into the 3K preschool, or, and then we had some kids, we had a few people who had more school age, like kindergarten and up. And I think we had one or two families that had high school age.
Yes.
So we'll talk a little bit about the continuum, and then, we can also share about our experiences. For me, I didn't have a lot of services growing up, and so, and then with Jill's son, they've had some interesting, done some interesting work to make sure that he's got services in his school, and how she can talk about those transitions. But so if you are a family watching and you have a young child with albinism under the age of 3, you are served under, because they're not in school yet, maybe they may be in a daycare setting, but they're not in a formal public school yet. They're served under early childhood. I think it's part C of IDEA. And so they're served under early childhood intervention or early intervention. So you might see ECI or EI as the abbreviations. And sometimes doctors, pediatricians, ophthalmologists, low vision specialists, sometimes they do not refer for these services. And they may not even be I don't want to say they're not aware, but it's not on their radar to like hand you a pamphlet and walk out of there and say, hey, this is what you need to sign up for next. Early intervention is, it supports children in that early childhood age range to start developing skills and making sure that they're meeting their milestones along their typically cited peers. And so there's an application process, and every state, you can look up early childhood intervention in your city or in your state. And maybe you even have to go through Child Find. Every state is a little bit different. So like in Texas, any related services like speech or occupational or physical therapy, those go through, like more like the medical and contracting. But for vision services, VI will say, and for orientation mobility O&M services, those typically in Texas go through the public schools. And so our teachers of the visually impaired TVIs and O&M instructors work with school age kids and also with babies through ECI. So what you do is you'll fill out an application, and they probably will require some justification from the eye doctor, but any perceived delay or disability can be explored through early intervention. So if you have a niece or nephew who you feel like is speech delayed, they could qualify for early intervention just like your child with albinism might, for different reasons. And so you would go through that application process, and then they would early intervention would identify the appropriate service providers in different areas to evaluate your child, and then they would determine eligibility. And then they would provide services, and you can come in and out of ECI. Like if you do it for a while and then it's not working for you, or you're feeling like your child is meeting all their milestones and doesn't need it, you can opt out of it. You don't have to, but it is, I believe it's helpful to have the evaluation and just make sure. And we could talk a little bit more about that, about why in a minute, but they would then, they could provide services. They will work with you on an individual family service plan, IFSP, and they would write family-centered goals for your child. So like if your child is struggling with using utensils, maybe because they can't see other people using utensils up close, they could help you work with your child on how to do those things. So Jill, I feel like I remembered you had some things to say about Kyle's experience, or your experience in ECI.
Yeah, so, like Kathi mentioned, what's wonderful about the plan is that it is a family plan. So you work together as a family, and in setting goals for your child at a young age. So for us, we had a kind of an interesting experience when we had an IFSP for our son, in that we worked both with a TVI who was also licensed as an orientation mobility specialist. And she would come into our home to work with our son on certain skills. And believe it or not, at a very young age, 8 or 9 months old, our son was already working on maneuvering stairs. Now, we live in a 2-story home that has very steep stairs. And that was literally the first skill that he worked on. And it was truly for safety, his safety in our home. And so it was kind of scary as a parent to watch that. But it wasn't just, it ended up not just being that we were watching, we were also being taught how to support our son in maneuvering the stairs. And just in doing that and being a part of the process gives you comfort. And you're able to start seeing your child learn these skills where they already at a very young age learn some sort of independence and how to advocate for themselves, to know what it is that they need to do to be safe, for instance. So yeah, that is very, very helpful. And again, everybody has a slightly different experience in seeking out early intervention. For us, we actually ended up reaching out to our local school district, who we worked with on seeking out a program for infants and toddlers with visual impairments. Our particular district didn't have a program, so we were referred to and worked through our district in working with a neighboring district who did have a program. So again, just to emphasize what Kathi is sharing as a TVI, is that not only every state, but every area within a state may be slightly different, because your district may not have a program, but another school district may, and like we experienced. And that's how you're able to retain services for your student.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good comment about the stairs and the goals and things, because I feel like, now I have not done research on this because I'm not into research, but so don't quote me on this, but in many cases, in my experience with kids with albinism are typically very verbal and very articulate and expressive and gregarious, and can easily confuse people about what they can and can't, about their visual impairment, because a lot of kids with albinism are in that mid-range vision loss, where they can do a lot of things like quote, air quotes, typically cited siblings or peers. They can seem to keep up, and then other times they seem to struggle. And so some parents have, what is the saying now, Jill? It's like, feel some type of way, you feel some type of way about labeling your child early, or getting that label. But we talked a little bit about this in the original call, where it's not, again, it's fluid, you can come and go, but like, think of all of the things, so many kids with sight, typical sight, learn things incidentally, and their motivation to move even comes from seeing objects that they're interested in, seeing you do things in the kitchen, they're imitating. Yes. We know toddlers are very imitative, and they like to play dress up and be mom and dad or whoever, and and so our kids, or I guess I should say we, because I'm a kid with albinism, but like kids with low vision in general, they miss some of those, that incidental learning. And even though it might not be a lot, they miss some of those concepts. They might not understand relative size, because if they're seeing pictures of animals in books, they might be missing, like, what is the scale?
Right.
So an ant might be able to beat up a rabbit, because to them they might be the same size,
right?
Because the characters are drawn in such a way. And so thinking about those kinds of things, that it's not so much like we're going to help your kid meet their milestones as much as it is we're going to help your child understand their world in a different way. I mean, for the longest, I see trees as like kind of green puffs on top of brown sticks, you know, and it's not until I've had a lot of experiences getting close to trees, seeing how the individual leaves grow and how palm trees leaves grow differently than like an oak tree, and the branches, how, you know, certain trees don't really have the same branch structures as other trees, and all of those things I miss until I've had really purposeful experiences with those.
Well, and with you saying that, it reminds me of something that you and I have talked about in the past, is that you, as a person with albinism, may see a tree differently, and having you as a friend and knowing you as a TVI, you can teach that to me as a parent. But the other thing that I think is even more important for me as a parent, that I've learned from you as a person with albinism, is that even though you see it differently, doesn't mean you don't enjoy it as much as I do, looking at the beauty of a tree, or
Right.
the, you know, the beauty of a flower, or, you know, looking up at the sky and seeing the clouds in the sky. So again, back to being part of NOAA, and having Noah as a resource, it's also meeting people who you can talk to, like Kathi, and learn from.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, and right, you know, and it's everybody has a different comfort level too with what they're willing to kind of, where they're willing to go. And but I do think that early intervention is really
yes.
key to our kids, you know, developing, getting those concepts. Now,
Mhm.
you know, and I hate blanket statements. I try really hard not to do blanket statements. And so I don't want to say like, oh, I didn't have ECI and I turned out fine. I mean, I didn't have ECI and I feel like you know, I do well, but it doesn't mean that it's detrimental if your child is older and didn't have it. I encounter families all the time in my work who, you know, who didn't have ECI. But if you're, you know, on the fence, I think we had a parent in the group say, you know, she was really on the fence about it. And she said, but you know, it was really worthwhile to her because she was worried that it might further limit her child by putting that label on. She said, and in fact, she noticed some things that we didn't notice that we were able to kind of work on and deal with before she started school. And so, you know, again, it's all about what your comfort level is and what you want for your child. And but you know, that being said, there are some cases where kids with albinism don't qualify for ECI because maybe their vision is such that it doesn't qualify. And in some states, we had one family from Illinois who said that albinism is an automatic qualifier there. I know in Texas it's not. And so, you know, it's sometimes kids don't qualify for early intervention because, you know, maybe they are meeting their milestones, they have enough vision, you know, and they're doing what they need to do. And so that's also, you know, on the flip side, I think ECI is great, but on the flip side of that, if you don't qualify, you know your child best, but it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't think you have to call lawyers and alert the media, you know, if you don't qualify. You know, I think it's like, it's all about what your child's and your family's needs are, you know.
And oh, sorry, Kathi.
No, go ahead.
Well, and I was just going to say, and that leads to, if your child doesn't qualify, of where you can go to seek out resources to support you to continue to support your child. And so I was just going to share one of the books that NOAA has, which is Raising a Child with Albinism, A Guide to the Early Years. If you haven't seen this book, it is very helpful to parents with young children in the years of 0 to 3.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So then at age 3, we start looking further at more educational and academic progress and milestones. And a lot of states will have standards for like pre-K standards. And then in addition to their grade level curriculum goals or standards or directives or whatever. In Texas, we call it the TEKS, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, and they come at each grade level. But for pre-K, we have the pre-K standards, pre-K guidelines and standards. And so I think, like, you know, that is one of those transition points. And what typically happens, and it's nice, like in Texas, when you have the VI teacher and the O&M who are already working for the district, and they're kind of contracted through ECI to serve or whatever, that they're kind of, it makes for a little bit more of a seamless transition, because a lot of times they will pick up that child on their caseload because they've been working with them. And so you start going into the public school. And so your child does not have to go to public school at age 3 to continue to receive services. You would likely have a transition meeting and have an IEP meeting, which is to determine an individualized education plan, as opposed to you transition out of that family service plan into an educational programming plan. In Texas, we call those meetings ARD meetings, admission review dismissal, in the context of special ed, but every other state, I think, is IEP. Go Texas, right? Really. And so, you know, so those that you would transition to be served, the services transition to be through the school district. Now, during early childhood intervention and at age 3, if your child is in a daycare setting, you can ask that services be provided in that setting, you know, where the child is. And some districts can make it happen, and others may work with you on, well, could we do it at home at this time, you know, instead,
Right.
like on a Saturday or whatever. But you can always ask. And I think in most cases, the professionals providing the service appreciate that, because, you know, they want to make the service meaningful for the child. It doesn't do us any good to work on a skill at home that the child needs to have at school, you know, and
Right.
a lot of course, skills cross over. You know, we don't assume that a child is only going to read and write at school. They're going to read and write at home. But I mean, there are some skills that the student, you know, it makes more sense to practice lining up at school where there's other kids in the way,
Right.
you know, and other obstacles. And it makes sense to have support with orienting to your classroom as well as orienting to your home.
Yes.
And so you don't have to enroll, you know, I think some of the roadblocks to that 3 to 5 age group being served in the public school is the time. You know, a lot of those programs are half day or 3 hours, and they're not full day programs. And parents who work, you know, I'm right there. My son stayed at his daycare for pre-K because I couldn't go pick him up at 2 p.m. every day and then take him somewhere else, you know, because I don't drive. And so it was like, it would be too much negotiating.
Right.
So you can negotiate those services to the location where the child is, or you can enroll them in, we're kind of transitioning out of the term PPCD or Head Start into early childhood special education, ECSE classrooms. I know it's an alphabet soup, I'm sorry. But, you know, so it's
Yes, it
early
is.
childhood special education is where ages 3 to 5 are typically served. And some of your kids may just be in general ed pre-K, and that, you know, that's fine too. It just depends on what the needs of the child are. You know, kids with albinism are not immune to additional learning disabilities or autism or speech delays. We don't typically think of those as, quote, going along with albinism.
Right.
But we're not immune. It's not like they said, it's not like the genetics said, oh, hey, you know, you've got albinism, I'm not going to slam you with needing braces too, you know, like it's, you know, but yeah, I mean, so they're not immune to those. And you know, it's the placement will be a conversation that you have with the school team, but you can have services from ages 3 to 5 before they formally enter public school as well.
And that's very helpful for them to have that introduction to the classroom environment. And like Kathi said, even learning skills like lining up. And, you know, our son had both experiences. Our district offered programs for the 3 to 5 age group. And so he was involved both in a school program for the first year, and then he transitioned to a private preschool and had a year in a private preschool and received some services. So, back to what Kathi was saying, it's depends on what your district may have as programs to offer to your student that may help determine where your student has that classroom experience from 3 to 5 and how they receive their services. But it's a matter of working closely with your team, and which would include usually the TVI and possibly an O&M specialist. For us, it also included the classroom teacher and both of us as parents, of course. And then if we wanted to invite somebody else to those meetings, when we did discuss programs and goals, we were able to do that as well. So even if you have a family member, maybe a grandparent, that you would like to have them come to the meeting and be part of that discussion, you can do that as well, because it truly is a team. It's a team of both school personnel and service providers and your family. So,
yeah. And so then, the other thing to consider, and this is can get to be a tricky topic. The other thing to consider is that many families choose to have their children go through private schools or they choose to homeschool their children. And I know especially a lot now with, in the pandemic where safety is a concern or there's a lot of different variables that might contribute to that. The thing to remember is that if you choose to private school or homeschool your children, Jill, I just can't really say this diplomatically. I have been trying for years. There's really not a lot of direct services that might take place in many cases, unless so that's the overarching. So the more intricate answer is that many kids who are in private school can access services through a teacher of the visually impaired or mobility instructor, but they have to contract out for those. And a lot of times that expense falls on the family. The same goes for homeschool. Because the way that the laws are written is that it's kind of like private school and homeschool, because they're not publicly funded, it's harder for them to justify sharing those services out when they already have a caseload of kids. It's not that these professionals don't care about your kids.
right.
It's that because of the funding, many of these professionals' caseloads are already big being in the public school. And so
sometimes there's just not the personnel to
right.
I think that's what you're saying is that there's not enough.
It's not like they're saying, oh, we have all these people, we're just not going to let you because you chose private school. It's like, we don't have enough to go around.
Yeah.
And so, and from a professional perspective, I think it's super unfortunate, but I understand why it happens. And so that is a big, I think that is something to think about very carefully when you're making those choices of public school or not public school. And I don't say that to scare people into going to public school. I know everybody has different reasons for, homeschooling or going to private school, but it is something to consider, especially as your kids get older and the print gets smaller and the academic rigor increases and you're prepping for college entrance tests where you might want accommodations, but you've never had accommodations justified in the past. Those are those real life experiences that sometimes can come back and bite you, because it's hard to get those accommodations if you have to really justify that. That being said, the local school, regardless of whether your child attends, in my experience is they're still required to evaluate that child. And so you can still ask for evaluations every 3 years, which is standard. Or if you have a big transition, or if your child has had a significant reduction in vision for some reason, you can ask for those sooner than the 3 years. But that school, so long as you're willing to make your child available to the personnel, which might mean taking them to the school, or at designated times, pulling them from their other curriculum to do that. But they can still evaluate your child and provide up-to-date educational evaluations that the private school teachers can use, or you as a homeschooling parent can use to help determine what accommodations might be most appropriate for your child.
Yes.
And so, yeah, go ahead, Jill.
I was just going to say, and it really comes down to to what is best for your child, what works best for your child, and based
for your
on
family,
and for your family,
Yeah.
and their needs, to be successful, not just in the classroom, but in life, in the future. So, we as parents, we've always said we always look 2 years ahead. It feels like, you're kind of always planning at least 2 years ahead, especially when you're looking towards, transitions from preschool to kindergarten, and transition from elementary school to middle school, and middle school to high school. So you're always looking ahead, and as your student and your child gets older, working with them and making them part of the process too.
Yeah, for sure. And also keeping them, having them be a part of those meetings as they get older, and helping them to understand that when you go from high school to college, you're transitioning from kind of entitlement. And I don't mean that I don't mean that in terms of like entitled people, but I mean, in public school, you're entitled to these services, and they have to provide them. Whereas out in the world after public school, it becomes an eligibility. You're eligible for these, but you have to seek them out.
Yes.
You don't have somebody. In fact, I actually just said today, wow, I think that my IEP should just continue into adulthood, because these are the things I struggle with, and I need some support here. But like, it becomes more of like the individual, the person with albinism goes from being entitled to these services and having somebody kind of catching them at every step and providing those, or their parents are advocating for those, to now you have to go and talk about where you're going to get your devices and how you're going to, and you have to talk to your professors about what your accommodations are. And, they're all kept on file in Office of Disability Services at the college level, or, they may be on file at your place of employment, but until you ask for them, nobody's going to shove them down your throat, essentially, the way they kind of do in public school. Like, now, Kathy, don't you think if you used your monocular, you'd be able to see that math problem a little better? Nobody was doing that, I mean, like that was school, but in college, nobody was doing that. So,
right.
Man, I just remember like my first day of college when I was in like a auditorium style class, and I was like, heck yeah, I'm going to sit in the back of the class, because I've always had to sit in the front of the class, and I'll show you. And like, I learned absolutely nothing. So like the next day I had to go sit like in the front again, but man, I really stuck it to those school teams, didn't I?
Well, and I think that's, if your child does have early intervention and has the experience of being in a preschool and working with service providers at a younger age, as they go through especially elementary school into middle school, they do retain that information and the skills that they learned, and they do come back to them as they get older, and they do remember, oh, I should be maybe trying to use my monocular in this situation. I need to pull that out and try it, so the skills that they learn when they're very young, it's amazing to watch as they get older, that they do kind of pull it out of their hat, like, oh, this is a skill that I can use now as an adult. So
yeah. So where do we go? Jill, do you want to talk a little bit about the second parent book, since we're kind of talking now across the continuum of school age?
Oh, sure.
I don't know if you have your copy handy, but
I do.
Yeah.
This is the second parent book that Noah did, And this one is Raising a Child with Albinism, a Guide to the School Years. And this is more for, when your child starts kindergarten, for instance, transitioning into kindergarten, and transitioning out of high school, going into the workforce or college. And just some of the chapters that are in this book that you'll find. Social aspects of raising a child with albinism. There's an entire chapter on orientation mobility, which we've been talking about today. IEP essentials, which would be very helpful when preparing for your IEP meeting with your team to discuss goals and just understanding the elements of an IEP. Also, there's a chapter about expanded core curriculum, which I know is it's a very important topic, and Kathi and I are both very passionate about that. And maybe Kathi, you can touch on that topic in a minute here. Also, there are chapters concerning low vision technology and devices that may be helpful to your child. And so just becoming familiar with them and just understanding what's out there as resources in that technology arena is helpful as a parent, so that when you start having those conversations with your child's service providers, their TVI and O&M specialist, you have an idea of, what might work for your child by observing them in a home environment and out and about, traveling, going on vacation, watching them maneuver through an airport, so that you can bring that information to the table in talking about devices with the TVI and or the O&M specialist. Kathi, did you want to say something?
No.
Oh, okay.
I mean, or did it look like I did, or are you?
Yeah, I was like, oh no, I'm keeping her from sharing something.
No, go ahead. You're doing a lovely job, Vanna.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And like I mentioned, there is a chapter as well on transitioning to adulthood. And one of the things that was added to this book that as a parent, I was really excited about in talking about adulthood. There is a section where there are several people, adults, who contributed pieces to the book and talked about them as adults with albinism and what they've done as far as, schooling after high school or their work experience, where they are now. And it's referred to as the tapestry of our community. So there are wonderful stories to read about people such as Kathi, you're in there, right?
Yeah.
In the tapestry.
I was gonna say, I know one that is very outdated, probably.
Well, so it's just a wonderful insight, and such a lovely part of the book, in that people were so willing to share and give to those who are reading the book their experiences as adults with albinism.
Yeah. And so, we've kind of covered, I know we haven't talked a lot about the school years. We've talked a lot about early childhood and the 3 to 5. But in the resources that we're about to share, I was thinking, Jill, that we would move into sharing some of the resources that NOAA has for families. I think a lot of those school-aged children are covered through those resources. But again, of course, if you have questions, you are welcome to reach out to Jill and I through one of the resources that we're going to share, or by reaching out to NOAA, and Lori can pass this along.
Yes.
So I think, Jill, we were going to talk about the school kit a little bit.
Yes. So the school kit was a project that Kathi and I and several other teachers worked on developing. It stemmed from an article that was done in the magazine Albinism Insight, excuse me. And actually, Kathi, did you write that article?
Yeah,
I thought so.
It was an Inquire to Inspire topic.
Yes.
We used to have that column in there, and it was, what do you do to get ready for the beginning of the year? And we polled, I talked to several families and used their insight to construct this article. And I think it's just really cool because then this idea came out of it, like, wow, we should put together a tool or a resource for families to use kind of as a guide, for helping them kind of structure that. Because, the other thing is that we know that kids with albinism have varying levels of professionals, support, related services, service delivery times. And so sometimes parents are finding that they're really leading these conversations because maybe their child is on a 504 plan, which is an accommodations plan, instead of like a full individual education plan where they're working with a VI teacher. And so we felt like it would be really awesome to be able to empower parents and families to have these conversations with gen ed classroom teachers. And so the premise is that this resource is for how to prepare for the school year for the child with albinism in the general education setting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the school kit, as we refer to it as, it's broken up into sections. So again, the first section is sharing general information with educators. So included in that are some bulletins that NOAA created that talk about topics such as what is albinism. Sometimes you'll come across a school district that may never have had a student with albinism. So this particular information sheet just really lays out general information and some specifics about albinism. Another topic is albinism terminology. That's a list that's included so that you can share that with the classroom teacher, with the principal of the school. And it just helps them become knowledgeable about the terminology we may already use as parents, but also from a service provider perspective. Other sections also include sharing educational information with educators. So in there, we talk about the role of the instructional team members. So for instance, a classroom teacher may have never worked with an orientation mobility specialist. They just may not be familiar with that service. And so this would give them an idea of when this person comes, the orientation mobility specialist person comes to the classroom to pull your student out of class to have a session, a lesson with them. The classroom teacher is more familiar to what their student might be doing with the orientation mobility specialist, what types of skills they might be learning, and what type of activities they might be doing outside the classroom. Other sections include materials for the educational team, and sharing information on continuation of skills in the home and community, which that includes ECC, expanded core curriculum, which again, Kathi, I hope you get to talk about. And the last section is resources. And that includes some checkoff lists of acronyms, parent to-do lists, and also tips for parents from parents when getting prepared for school and working with the classroom teacher and service providers.
Yeah, so it's got a lot of sections in it, and but and some of the information is repeats in multiple sections because it's like sharing this information, but also just for you to have it. And so I think that it's, you can access the school kit by going to www.albinism.org/school-kit with a K, and it's all one word. School kit is all one word. And then it also has Jill and my contact information. Well, it has a school kit email address that you can email to get directly to Jill or I if you have questions about how to use it. Or have questions about the documents. It's long. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It's like, what is it, like 70 something pages, Jill?
Yeah, it is.
Pages? It's insane.
Yeah.
But it's broken down in the sections to kind of help you. And one of the pieces that I really have to plug, because I think we spent like 70% of the time that we spent on the school kit was on this one document, is this conversations bank. I think it's in section 2 and it's kind of like a mock interview for like questions that you might ask the teacher to help guide their thinking about how to support your student. And also questions that you can give to the teacher and say, hey, ask me these questions. Let's talk about these things.
Yep.
Like questions that the teacher would want to consider when supporting your student, like seating and lighting and glare and, like visual fatigue and things like that, assigning homework, all things that are probably in your child's IEP or modifications plan for a 504, but things that might, I don't know, I think that as a culture, we are really moving away from like extended reading. And so I think these, like as a teacher myself, like you get these, some of these IEPs are like 30 something pages. And how do you really wade through that? And I want
Right.
to say, like, I know what the law says, right? Like the law says that I, as the teacher, have to know those pages. I have to know what my students are working on, what their accommodations are, what their needs are. But like, let's step out of the laws a little bit, and say, like, in reality, these teachers have 1,000 things going on too. And it's not that they're being negligent or that they don't care about your kid. It's that the reality is, how can we give them this information in a digestible way, right?
Yes.
I mean, like, we all know the laws about seat belts and car seats, but sometimes you're in a pinch and you might not follow everything to the T all the time, right?
Right.
You might just run in somewhere real quick, or you might do this, and like, I think of like the law is you're supposed to pay for your groceries before you eat them. But how many of us have given our kid a banana, or let's be real, like cookies in the grocery store just to get through that trip, right? And you pay for it at the end after they've already eaten it, so it's like, I think like everybody's doing their best, right? Like I try to assume positive and assume that everybody's doing their best, but some of these items in here can really help stream some of that information down for teachers.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because as a parent, we always try to be very sensitive to the fact that our child may not be the only child in the classroom that has an IEP. And so the teacher is sometimes very limited to the amount of time that they have to prepare for the new school year. I've known where teachers are only on campus for maybe a couple of days before the first day of school, and they're just trying to understandably get their classroom in order so they're ready for all their 30 to 35 kids showing up on the first day of school. So anything that we could do as parents ahead of time to prepare and share with the teacher to make it a little less cumbersome. Like Kathi said, sometimes IEPs can be 30, 40 pages long. And, that's a lot to shuffle through when you only have a couple of days to prep your classroom and you have 35 kids showing up. So, we would even do kind of a summary of the IEP that the teacher would have in front of them and have available just to like a one sheet so that they knew what our child's needs were. A short list of the accommodations, summarized bullet point wise.
We have an IEP summary doc in there.
Yes. And so
we have a doc for that.
Yes. So we have a doc for that in the school kit. And the other two things that I really like, and I always found helpful from the school kit, one is a fact sheet for substitute teachers, which we would prepare at the beginning of school. And that was also helpful to the teacher themselves. But, the fact sheet for substitute teachers can also be used for, let's say, for instance, your child is going to participate in a summer camp. This could be something you could give to the counselor. the camp counselor, or if your child has a new sitter that's going to stay with them for the evening while you're out having dinner. This is a one sheet that you can share with the sitter. And basically it just summarizes, again, what your child's visual needs are, and what technology might be helpful to them. Just quick facts that they can view when, again, a substitute teacher may be there just for one day, or even for just a couple of periods, classroom periods during the day. And this just gives them a quick snapshot of what your child needs in the classroom. So if the substitute teacher is in the classroom and your child gets up from their desk to look more closely at the board, the substitute teacher understands why the student is doing that, because it's in their fact sheet that was given to them as a substitute teacher. The other item that I like is that I found very useful was facts regarding children with albinism for physical education and recreation professionals. And I always kind of felt like sometimes the PE teachers would get forgotten, because especially in elementary school, they don't have PE every day, and maybe it's just twice a week for maybe 30-40 minutes. And I felt like the PE teacher sometimes wasn't feeling supported in being able to support students who had different needs. So this fact sheet just gives a teacher who happens to be a physical education teacher or a recreation professional bullet points about albinism and how they may be able to support that student in their classroom while they're playing a sport outside. For instance, like if they're playing volleyball, where should I have the student stand on the court? Well, having the sun back to them, to their back, can be more comfortable for a student who has albinism if they're very sensitive to, sun. So, and how we would couple that during the school year is by supporting the PE teacher, is by having the orientation mobility teacher have one of their sessions at the beginning of the year with our son during PE class. So the PE teacher and the orientation mobility teacher could work together, and it would give the PE teacher also an opportunity to ask the orientation mobility specialist questions about albinism in particular, what works well for our student in PE class, and what things that the PE teacher may look out for safety purposes while they're playing different sports. So.
Yeah. And so that's I think that there are so many, little nuggets in there that are really good. I definitely also want to say that this, and I think we touched on this, but I just want to be really pointed about how we say that, you can pick this apart and use bits and pieces. You don't have to, you don't feel like if you don't use the entire document, or if it's overwhelming, that it's not going to be useful. There are a lot of little things in here that you could use in isolation that might be really helpful for you or your child or your, or the school team as well. And
Absolutely.
If you have a vision teacher or more mobility specialist who's very active in your child's programming, I think this is something that you guys can use together. We've had a lot of vision teachers. I've had a lot of vision teachers approach me and say how they've enjoyed using this resource, not just for their kids with albinism, but for other kids with low vision and kids who are blind, that they've been able to adapt it for. And from the perspective of those of us at TSBVI who were working on this, that's kind of what we wanted. We wanted something that was going to be specific to albinism, but also general enough that it could be, generalized across other etiologies and eye conditions, because all of our kids, and I mean, even as a classroom teacher, I think it would be what a great example you would be as a parent to come in with this substitute fact sheet, and the teacher may say, hey, can I get one of those to fill out for my other kids under special education? Just because I think like we hear so many stories from our kiddos. I say kiddos, like my students with visual impairments, about struggles they've had with substitutes. And I just keep thinking back to this document, like how great would that have been for them to have that.
Yeah.
So do we want to talk a little bit about the CARE project, Jill? And then I can talk about the ECC, because I think that ties into like IEP goals and things like that.
That'd be great.
Cool. Get on
Okay.
it. You go,
So, so NOAA has a program called the CARE Project, and it stands for Creating an Albinism Resource for Education. And what it is it's a database of 504 plans, IFSPs, and IEPs. And it's a resource for you to go to find examples of how IEPs, IFSPs, and 504s have been written for other students. So literally people have shared their IEPs with NOAA, and they've been put into this database. So you can search them by grade and by state. You'll notice too, when you go in there and start looking, that every state's forms can be a little bit different, but the basic concept of what's included in and I'll focus on IEPs, in the IEPs is the same. So you'll find goals, you'll find accommodations, and you'll find a list of services that that are listed in these documents. And it's a great resource to go to when you are preparing for your own IEP meeting. Just to put some thoughts together as to what you find as parents to be the main topics that you're concerned about and want to bring up with your IEP team. During an IEP meeting, what you'll be asked for as parents in the beginning are, what are your main concerns? And when we would prepare for an IEP meeting, especially when it was very new to us, we did utilize the CARE project as a resource to get some ideas as to what goals we may discuss with the IEP team, what accommodations might be appropriate for our student based on utilizing this resource. But we would really prepare ahead of time and put down on paper what our concerns are, what the goals are that we want to see for our son in going forward in the next year, and not just goals associated with school, but also goals that we wanted to work on with him as parents in the home. And we would put all this information down on paper for ourselves, and we started calling it a parent report. And we would bring it to the IEP meeting, and just as the service providers would provide us with reports based on the previous school year, and where they felt our son was at as far as his goals, we would also present our parent report. And what was really nice about it is, because we had prepared ahead of time, it really allowed us to focus on what the service providers were sharing with us. And in time, our team actually really appreciated how we put all this information together, and they started including it as part of the notations within the IEP itself. So not that you have to create a parent report, but if anything, just taking some time ahead of the meeting to seek out different resources, talk to people who are familiar with developing goals and resources that NOAA has, and just learning what is included in a goal, and making sure that you have all those pieces included in the goal itself, when you're working with your team, is really helpful preparation. And so again, the CARE project is a great resource to look at different examples of IEPs, 504s, and IFSPs. And again, it is searchable by grade and by state. But one thing to remember is that just because there's a goal that you find that sounds really great in one of these examples in the CARE project database, does not mean that it will necessarily be completely appropriate for your student. It may provide a base for a discussion with the IEP team if the goal brings up something that you're concerned about, such as maybe an O&M goal would be being able to walk from school to home, and how that would be done and how much time would be needed to reach that goal for your student. So that particular goal might be something to bring up with your team, but the specifics of the goal, you know, the time period that's involved, how that will be accomplished, that goal will be accomplished, may look a little bit different than the goal that you read in the example in the CARE project.
Yeah, and I think that can just come from all the kids are different. And so,
exactly,
you know, and again, we've already established that those IEPs and IFSPs can be really long. And so sometimes you may be tempted to skip over the part of the document that's, you know, if it's in there that has like where the present levels of the student are. And so, you know, you could be reading through these and maybe the student is in the same grade as your child, but they're maybe at a different academic level or have some other identified eligibilities that are impacting those goals, because we hope
exactly.
that everybody's kind of writing goals together as a team, you know, and that any related services are kind of overlapping in their work. So yeah, I think it's such a great resource for families. And so, you know, Jill, aside from talking about the expanded core curriculum, do we have anything else that we wanted to share? I do want to say that the CARE project, I can't remember if you said this, Jill, but it's www.albinism.org/care, CARE.
Thank you.
And you can get the direct link there in a live session we shared in the chat. The other thing I wanted to bring up real quick while Jill's checking her notes over there, is that, you know, we've talked a little bit, we've mentioned 504 and IEP, and there's different plans in that CARE project. And so some people might be wondering, like, what's the difference and why is one more important? I see this a lot in the groups on social media, this question about IEP versus 504. And one of my favorite resources is this, it's called, well, it's not, I don't know if it's a resource, it's like an article, and it's through American Foundation for the Blind, their Family Connect, and it's called 504 versus IEP, or IEP versus 504. I don't remember which order it's in. And if you go into your browser and you search AFB Family Connect 504 versus IEP, or any combination of those, it should come up. I usually get it on the first or second, you know, link. And it's just a great article about kind of comparing, and it's, the other thing is that it's specific to VI. So it's not, you know, it's not a general comparison, it's specific to kids with visual impairments and what that means, which I think is important, because I was just talking with a friend who was saying that her daughter is being, is receiving an eligibility for dyslexia. And she's having to make the decision about whether she wants an IEP or a 504. And under 5, they clarified for her. Now, again, this might not be across the United States. It might just be here, but they clarified for her that under a 504, an accommodation is direct instruction from a dyslexia teacher, which would not be something she would receive if she had an IEP plan. She would receive instruction and resource that would not necessarily be, you know, by a dyslexia teacher. And so I thought that was really important. I thought that was really interesting
It
because
is interesting.
when we think of 504s and VI, we don't think of direct instruction at all. We think of an accommodations page.
Right.
And so, you know, it's like, okay, well, they have an accommodation to use their magnifier or their monocular, but there's really probably nobody there giving them training in that, or tweaking their positioning, or looking at the power, whatever power is recommended in the evaluation, that's what it's going to be. And it's like, you know, if you've ever visited a variety of websites on any given day, the sizes of the print across those websites is vastly different.
Yes.
And so one tool doesn't always do the job for our kids because not everything is standard. So it sounds like I'm really advocating and pushing for IEP over 504. And I mean to be a neutral person.
Yes.
I think this article gives you a really great place to start thinking about what's most appropriate for your kid. Many kids with albinism do just fine on 504s, but many kids with albinism need more than that, you know, in terms of their learning. And just because you have one in kindergarten and first grade doesn't mean that you can't reduce the services later, you know, like as they get into middle and high school and their devices aren't changing, they may be just fine with an accommodations plan instead of direct goals. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I was going to say, so I just tested out, you know, whatever I'm searching, if the article will come up. So I searched Family Connect 504 IEP, and the article title, I want to confirm with you, Kathi, IEP and 504 plan, what's the difference and which is most appropriate for my visually impaired child?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And it's just a really good, you know, I think it's really good to do that. And so, so that kind of transitions is a nice natural transition into this conversation about the expanded core curriculum, which we abbreviate ECC, because kids on a 504 plan are not going to be, they're not going to have goals and objectives for every year. They're going to have a modifications list based on their evaluations. And, kids on an IEP are going to have target goals and objectives that they're working on. And the expanded core curriculum is it's a set of content areas that was determined to be appropriate and necessary for kids who are visually impaired, right? So in the public school, every kid gets language arts, math, social studies, history, you know, health, whatever their core subjects are. The expanded core is relevant for kids with visual impairments because of the deficits in incidental learning that we talked about earlier, and because our kids sometimes take longer to acquire the same level of skills that sighted peers have. And I'm thinking in terms of like technology and computer use, learning to type and learning to navigate and files and folders and things, and also like mobility. So the ECC has 9 areas, and some of them are social skills, daily living skills, self-determination, which is like self-advocacy and empowerment in your own life, making decisions, planning for goals, compensatory access, which is anything that allows your child to access the curriculum as an extra, you know, that could be a device or Braille or whatever. And then career education. Sometimes our kids need some additional support in determining what kind of career they're going to have and developing those career readiness skills because maybe they've, you know, not developed them in other ways, like they haven't babysat or done other things that maybe typically sighted kids can do more easily or at the ready. And so in the state of Texas, a group went to, you know, the legislature and has actually mandated it as an essential area for kids with visual impairments. And so in the state of Texas, vision teachers are required by law to evaluate and provide instruction in the 9 areas of the ECC as part of a student with a visual impairments IEP. Now, that doesn't mean they have to evaluate every single area, every IEP year and teach something in every single area. It just means that they have to evaluate for deficits and in which areas do they occur and what what is a goal in that area. So and orientation mobility falls in there. So if your child's getting services in O&M, there, that's part of that. But not every state has it mandated, but it is really important. And so a lot of times when parents are asking me about a 504 versus an IEP, I start asking them questions about the ECC, like, how does your child do in the kitchen? How does your child, do they pick out their own clothes? Can they walk around the grocery store independently? Can they navigate in new environments? Do they know about budgeting and saving money? What are their typing skills like? How do they navigate a computer? Those kinds of things that aren't academic, but they support life, so I'm a big fan of the ECC. There's a flyer. Texas School for the Blind has a lot of resources about the ECC, and a lot of publications are available through TSB about the ECC. And you can search for TSBVI ECC flyer, and you can read more about the 9 areas of the expanded core curriculum. Or it's actually, I think it's in the school kit as well.
Yes, and because you created that in the school kit.
Not the ECC flyer, but
no.
ECC, we did some graphics about
Yes.
ways you can work on ECC at home or at the grocery store with your own children. Yeah.
And those are fantastic applications because they give you ideas of things you can do, like Kathi just said, at home with your child, going to the store, but maybe creating a grocery store list with your child before you go. And then once you get to the grocery store, you are looking for the items together, or cooking something in the kitchen together, getting out the recipe. What do you need? You need flour, sugar, you need certain measuring cups, and just going through that process. I mean, these are life skills that they can start learning at a very young age that fall under the ECC that they will carry throughout their lifetime.
Yeah, it's kind of like, when you say like, oh, when am I going to ever use calculus in my life? The ECC is like, oh, I'm going to use this in my life, and when am I going to learn it?
Exactly.
It's like all the stuff you need to know,
Yes. Yeah.
So Jill, do we have anything else that we want to share, or are we wrapping up?
I think we covered our checklist.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think we covered a lot of questions that families had in the original call as well about services and supports and eligibility.
Absolutely.
So, of course, if you have more questions, as we said before, we're available through the school kit page. There's an email, and I want to say it's schoolkit@albinism.org.
Yes, it is.
Email.
That's correct.
So you can email us there, or you can reach out to Noah directly, and they can send you to, again, we're not the experts. So sometimes I get things from Lori, and I assume that other people get them too. So whoever she thinks is appropriate to answer, she'll find it.
Exactly.
Not that we're telling you all to bombard Lori, but.
No, but she knows who to reach out to.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks for watching. And again, if you have any questions, we'd be happy to support you. And we look forward to seeing you guys at conferences in the future and on other calls if you're available.
Yep. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.